Ravens flock. The flock rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. So I'm telling you now, it's about to go down. The podcast, the flock rundown. Ravens, baby. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
Appreciate you, Ray. What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. So the Ravens are making some moves. Not huge moves. We've already got Derrick Henry and Matabike and kind of knocked the major moves out, I think. But they're making some nice, solid depth additions. So I'm going to run through who they've recently signed yesterday and today and who they're taking some visits on, and then we'll just talk about it. So this morning, the Ravens signed cornerback Ka'Dar Hollman from the Texans. He's a special teams rotational corner. He was drafted in the 6th round. He's 29 years old. He's been on a bunch of teams, Packers, Dolphins, Texans, I think a couple other teams as well. He was active for the Texans all last year, but mainly in a special teams role. He didn't see much playing time at corner, so I would say this is purely a special teams piece. And the Ravens could use some special teams help. You saw them sign Chris Board recently as well. We talked about that in the last video. And I think the special teams last year was more inconsistent than it has been in recent memory. So I think the Ravens aren't playing around. I want to get back to elite, dominant special teams play. So I would say that's what this signing is. And then obviously, if you're active as a special teams player, you're a depth player at that position as well. So he'll provide cornerback relief if needed, but I don't see him in any type of starting role. But I like the special teams play. This guy is a perennial special teams starter. And welcome aboard, Ka'Dar Hollman. The Ravens also signed tackle Josh Jones, who's kind of a swing lineman. He can play multiple positions, but he was a 3rd-round pick from the Cardinals in 2020. He's only 26 years old. He was recently on the Texans as well. And I think this is another depth play and possibly a competition play. I'm not saying that Josh Jones has no chance to start. Just given his career history, he's kind of thrown in a Macari type role. You know, he can play tackle, both tackles. He can step in at guard. He can literally play everything but center. He has played everything but center. I like this signing. He's young. He's only 26. We develop linemen really, really well. And I love linemen that can play multiple positions. Look how much we've needed and used Patrick Macari in the past. I think that he's going to be another type of that where you can plug and play in a multitude of ways. I'm sure he'll shine at a certain spot, you know, one over the other, and whatever spot that is, you know, right tackle or guard. And if he comes into camp and competes at a really high level, I think that, you know, the spot's open for a guy like that to win the job. But if not, he'll just be a really, really solid rotation depth piece just in case there are any injuries or if there's any performance issues from someone that's not usually the starter, whatever happens. Like, I think he's a nice safety net. And I think what the Ravens are doing by making signings like this are really just shoring up the roster and cleaning up as much holes and building as much depth as possible before the draft hits. And we still have a month before that, by the way, but this is what the Ravens are starting to do right now. And they're going to fill out a lot of these needs vaguely, you know, cheaply. And then when the draft comes, they can focus on just really grabbing best player available, which has always been their philosophy. Whatever stud keeps dropping in the draft and ends up at 30, that's who the Ravens are probably going to take. So I like these moves. These moves have never backfired. They've always been solid. I don't think any of these contracts are breaking the bank either. And then they haven't signed anyone yet at receiver, but they're bringing in multiple names for visits. So yesterday, we brought in Michael Gallup for a visit. He's 28 years old, coming off 418 yards. Not a great season, not a highly productive season in Dallas, but he's had a productive season before. I mean, he's a 1,000-yard receiver some years back, but since his injury, he kind of hasn't been able to find that role again. But I think he'd be a solid piece. He did leave without a deal, and then the Ravens today are visiting with Josh Reynolds, or did visit with Josh Reynolds. So we'll see what happens there. I think out of those two, I like Josh Reynolds better. I know he's 29 and Gallup's 28, But Reynolds is coming off more production. He had 600 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. He never really had the breakout year like Michael Gallup had, where he had 1,000 yards, but Reynolds has just been solid, and I like his game. I think it fits really well. I think he'd be a great wide receiver 3/4, because you still have Nelson Aguilar there as well, so probably play a similar role as Nelson Aguilar. And once again, this strategy is the Ravens building out depth so that they're not kind of feeling forced at 30 to reach for a receiver just to fill a hole. If a stud receiver drops to 30, I think they'll still pull the trigger. I think whoever's the best player, whoever's shockingly still there, that they just can't believe and is atop their draft boards, that's who they're taking at 30. So hopefully we do sign Reynolds. I like these moves. I like these smaller moves that don't seem to move the needle too much, but when the season's here and you're seeing these guys there, you're like, oh, wow, okay, I'm glad we have him. I think Reynolds would be one of those guys. He would be the Nelson Aguilar of last year again. Nelson had a great role for this team last year, and I think that getting another guy like that doesn't hurt anything. Now, there's a lot of chatter about, oh, we don't want another like average or mid receiver. I totally get that, but that's not what this strategy is. We're barely paying for these guys. These are just depth roster building moves. These aren't, hey, this is our future wide receiver. You know, Reynolds is 29, Gallup is 28. Neither are superstar receivers. They're not going to come in and be expected to be Zay Flowers. It just doesn't work like that. So I think that these are great moves. I know the receivers haven't been signed yet, so I'm just kind of reporting on the visits and talking about it and giving my thoughts, but I like these moves. I like what Eric DeCosta is doing. I think that you'll see a lot of this over the next month. We also might see some more chips fall, like Jadeveon Clowney is a big one still floating out there. But I don't think the Ravens are going to be ultra aggressive anymore, but they're going to be aggressive finding these value guys, these cheap guys, just to fill out this roster, and then they'll go attack in the draft next month. It's exciting times. The offseason's in full swing. Free agency's in full swing. The heat of it's probably passed a little bit, but we got the draft creeping up on us now, and then as the whole offseason goes, the free agents will still continue to get signed, and then mini camp and training camp will be here before we know it, man. I can't wait. Football is on my mind year-round, if you couldn't tell. You know you're a diehard when you're getting excited about Ka'Dar Hollman and Josh Jones being added to the team. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on these moves. As always, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.